Morning, I'm Mark from Trinic. In today's video we're going to take on a pretty adventurous project. We're going to make a wood look warped end fire table. We start by making the rubber mold, then we have a mold that we'll show you. It's similar to the warp mold we used in our last one. And then we're going to bend the edges up, have a fire table in the middle, strip it. We'll show you how to color it so it looks just like real wood. And then we're going to install the fire apparatus and let it burn. Now the wood we used, we got lucky. We found some boards at the Home Depot they use for packing boards, and they were on sale for $3 each. They started out this wide, then we ripped them down to what width we wanted. They're very, very rough when you first get them. They've got saw marks on them, which we want, and grain that's raised. We snapped some in half intentionally, and we ripped others to width. We made sure that this edge and that edge were not ripped, so they were a fine edge. Then we intentionally distressed them. We took a saw, we cut saw marks. You can use a hammer, do whatever you want. Chains, just to give it character. We want it to look like an old pallet would. You can actually use an old pallet if you can find the patience to take it apart. Then we cut them in random lengths, random widths, and we screwed them to our pattern. This is 2 foot by 8 foot. Once we've got them mounted to our board, we need to wax the wood good. To do that, I'm taking Johnson's paste wax. I'm going to light the wax on fire, put it out, and then spread the liquid wax with a paintbrush onto the wood. You can also liquefy it any other way you want to. But by liquefying it, it gets into the pores of the wood much better. This needs another screw. But it's that fast and you're done that piece of wood. Now as that sucks into the wood, it will stop our rubber from sticking. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to fill our larger gaps so that if the rubber were to run down in there, it could potentially rip the mat as we're taking it off. There's 2 options. One, we could use caulk and work it in the hole. The other option we found is to use a really hard carnauba wax. It's much harder, firmer than Johnson's. This is called tray wax. I find it at an old-time hardware store. I don't know if the big box places have it, but it's much harder than Johnson's. What you do, by hand, you rub it into the joints. And it fills the joints very, very fast. And it will stop the rubber from running down in the joints. Cracks, the same thing. Move along, fill your crack up. I wear gloves because I'm forever getting splinters from the wood. I like to recess the cracks a little bit so that on my finished piece I'll have dips in it, and I paint them or color them black with our color, you'll see later, and it really gives the boards a lot of division. Now what I did when I mounted my wood to the melamine below, I countersunk the hole, then I used a shorter screw, countersunk the screw, because I don't want this table to show screw holes. So I'm going to go along to each screw hole, put some clay in. This is sulfur-free plasticine clay. You can buy it from craft stores. This is a horseshoe nail. So what I'm going to do is fill the hole put an imprint of a horseshoe nail. Later, when we go to color this, we'll fill that sucker in. It'll look like an old-time nail hole. We'll do that to everyone holding the table down. Before you put your outer side on, you've got to seal the underside of the wood so that rubber doesn't get in there. This is the same plasticine clay. I'm just going to push it into place. As you can see, this form's been poured once before, so most of it's sealed. And then use something with a straight edge to take most of it off. Now what we're doing is we're making the thickness of the rubber over top of the wood 1/2 inch. So we've got 3/4 inch rubber plus another 1/2. The reason for that is when you bend it, it relies on the strength of the rubber not to collapse. The strength of the rubber helps a lot. These are just melamine sides. I'm also giving the edge 3/4 inch of rubber. Countersink. Screw it in. Later I'll put clay caulk over top of these so that they don't fill with rubber and I can still strip the piece. Now that I've installed my side form, I've got to caulk this edge. I'm going to use clay caulk. This is the same sulfur-free plasticine available at craft stores, and you can buy extruders. We have an industrial extruder. There's less expensive ones that on our Facebook page. I post links to it every now and then. And what I discovered is the hard part is pushing the caulk in the corner. So I found a tool meant to put screens in screen doors. And I ground the edge flat, and this applies to caulking concrete forms too. You dip this in a little bit of mineral spirits so it doesn't stick so bad. You keep the caulk like this, and it does a wonderful job of pushing the bead into the corner. Very fast. If you want to tool the joint, you can. These are available again through craft stores. You want to push rather than pull. It has a little ball in the end. You just start there, push. I'll try not to go so fast. And it forces it into the corner even more and gets the excess off. The next step, if you needed to, was to take a little bit of mineral spirits on a rag, and you can actually polish that caulk joint if you were doing concrete. But it's that fast. I'll have this whole thing caulked in probably under 5 minutes easy. And then we'll be ready to cast. I've got my sides on, everything's caulked, I waxed my sides, top two. The next thing I like to do is just take a rag and wipe off any excess. If you use, it's a fine line between too much wax and not enough. Too much wax, it'll start to fill in the highlights and you'll get almost a plasticky look. Not enough wax, it'll stick. But if you take a clean rag, once you're done, give it a good wiping, it'll generally suck up the excess wax. I can still feel it's very waxy feeling, which is good. But I also don't want too much wax. And I think we're ready to pour. Now we're ready to pour our rubber. Our mold's set, waxed, ready. We're going to use 74-45 for this. It's a medium density rubber. It'll allow it to bend up the edges easily. We like to mix it all at once. We calculated 76 pounds we're going to need. We might be a little short because we're going to use some leftover buckets. And we can mix all that 76 pounds in this all at once and be careful. Now the Polytech 74-45 as well as others are available through Trinic. Buy a whole pallet of Admix, fiber, we can throw the liquid rubber on for it. As another option, we offer for sale the finished forms. So you can buy this form from us, the rubber part only. But when we charge twice the raw rubber cost, so we'll do it for you for twice the raw rubber cost, you can do it yourself. To mix it, a few things you can do wrong, obviously if you don't mix it enough, or if you dump this in and then scrape the sides and dump that in, stuff on the sides of this bucket, there's always going to be a little bit of material that's not mixed. So we're going to dump all our buckets in, mix it, scrape our sides the best we can, fill our form one end to the other, and not dump the excess. We're going to leave it. After pour, you just take your fingers and clean out the excess. The other key to mixing is you don't want the paddle coming out and entraining air. It's hard to get the air back out, so keep this submerged and don't run it full volume unless you can totally submerge it. Good. Okay, we're mixed. Now our table is adjustable, the legs. What we're going to do is fill it most of the way, and as it settles, it finds its own level, we're going to adjust our legs. You need to have it perfectly level because it will find its level. Start at one end, just work our way slowly to the other end. Now what we don't want to do is we don't want to take and scrape that material out of there because some unmixed material might just be in there, and if we go ahead and scrape it out, it'll cause big problems in our mold. We have a little bit of a bow here, so I'm going to put a couple shims in the middle to get it to run towards the edges. It's been about 5 minutes since we poured it. It's still plenty liquid. We're just watching to get it perfect all the way around. This side, Vinny, jack that table up just a touch maybe. Well, let's see, down there it looks pretty good, right? So I'll jack that up with a shim. This is actually a silicone release agent. It's called Poly-Ease 2300. If you spray it on the back of the rubber while it's still just now poured, it pops all the air bubbles. Now I would, you can pour this rubber, pull it tomorrow, pour it tomorrow, but if you want to get more pores out of your rubber, if you were to let it sit, I would say 2 to 3 days before you poured it or even stripped it, and then didn't pour it for a week, you'll get more pores out of it than if you take a risk and pour it while it's still soft, because it's still getting harder and harder. You can pour it the next day, wait a few days, you're better off. Here's the warp form we used in our last video to make a warp table. I'll put a link to that video up. We added some refinement since then. We added these adjustable clips so that when we tilt it up, we can snap these in place and then get a 90 real quick without adding buckets to the backside. Here's how the warp table form's put together. This is a piece of bendable plywood. It's only made to bend in one direction, this way, and it sits on top of these plywood forms that are recessed hinged. If you just put the rubber on this, it tends to bind when you try to tilt it. Or if you put bendable plywood on top of it, as it's bending, the plywood's able to slide with the rubber. Since we poured this mat, I want to take off the excessive caulk that's around and clean the mat before we pour it. I'm going to just use mineral spirits on a rag and wipe up the mat. Now we've got our mat pretty much clean. This is Johnson's paste wax. You apply it with a rag. Rub it in good. Same with your edges. If you've got any spots where the wood's stuck really bad, you can use a dull edge scraper and scrape some of the wood grain out. Most of it will come out with your first pour. The next thing we're going to modify on this bent form, thanks to a customer, is we're going to keep this edge from bulging. When you bend this thing upward, this rubber takes a natural bulge out, which actually looks pretty good on the straight pieces because you can tell it's been bent. But on this wood form, we want to find a way to hold this in place. And it's simple. You just take a couple blocks and screw them in the right spot. And you'll see we're going to keep the form from bulging out when it bends. Lift it up. I'll mark this one. Screw it in place. Now we bend up, and the blocks will hold the form in place, keep it from bulging. Now I'm going to locate the insert for my fire table. I'm going to use these. They're screws with some washers on the top to hold it in place. A little longer. But what I'll do is I'll pour the base, let it get hard, tilt it up, pull these screws out, and then come over top of this with another piece so that this thing will pop out later. Now we're going to use clay caulk to caulk the joint between the block out and the rubber form. We use stuff from Gruber. We use their soft tooling clay. You can buy clay at the craft store. Make sure you buy a sulfur-free plasticine clay. You don't want the clay that gets hard. This is our extruder. This comes in blocks like this. We put it in our extruder and it spits us out caulk. You don't need an air-powered extruder. I'll put a link in the video description to a less expensive hand cranked, or else guys are putting their cordless drills on it, and they're using that to extrude clay. So you don't need all this, you can use it. I extrude a ribbon of clay. Every now and then you got to dip it in some mineral spirits so the clay doesn't stick to it, but it rolls right on along. For deep spots, you might need to double it up. Then you take your balls, you can buy these at the craft store, and gently work the clay in. It's easier on a concrete form. We're just about ready to pour. When we pour, once it sets a little bit, we're going to lock this in, just like that. I'll do a little pre-adjusting to get our 90. But then, rather than put rods through here like we have in the past, we're going to rely on this to form a beam. And then, once we pour, we're going to cut these off as needed. We're going to continue our beam, probably right through here. So we'll have a beam, 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 and we won't have to worry about putting any other support below this. The way we loaded our ingredients in our bucket is very important. Always put the sand at the bottom, sand, cementitious, whatever else, and then Admix is at the top. That way you'll never have to scrape your barrel. It will always be self-cleaning the rim. This barrel holds a cubic foot is easy. This is 1.2 cubic feet. What we're doing, since this is CSA, is we're going to keep the CSA out until we get this blended to a slurry. That way we'll get all the lumps out. The procedure is to put enough of your water in so that your mixer is working pretty hard. And that's how you get the lumps out of your mix. If you put it all in at once and it turns to a slurry, you'll never get the lumps out. I'm not going all the way into the sand layer yet until I get the top part mixed up. Now I've got the top layer mixed up, I start to plunge into the sand layer and it really gets a good shearing action going on. Now I've got a good lump-free mix. I can add a bunch more water. Last but not least, or second to last, I'll add all of the CSA, blend that in. A little more water. Then you got some little bit of brown, just a touch. Now, a big part of the reason I can do this is because of Trinic's admixture. They allow you to mix larger quantities quickly. We're going to put just a little bit of golden color in here, because it will be a wood look. I add that, I'm going to mix the color in. You could have mixed it in at the start, it doesn't matter. Then I'm going to add the fiber. The fiber is glass, and you will break glass if you overmix it. So you always put it in at the very end, mix it enough just to consolidate it. This is good looking. I've got a little bit of water left. I'm going to add just a touch more. We want it to be self-consolidating. We want air to be boiling up a little bit. We are done. Took all of under 5 minutes to mix a cubic foot. Give me a little spray gel on this thing. When you're dumping your mix, as the name implies, it should self-level, self-consolidate. What you don't want is bleed water coming out of it. If you've got excessive bleed water, something's out of whack. Could be too much water, could be too much plasticizer, but something's not right in your mix. As you notice, we don't pour a face coat. This is known as direct casting. Direct casting, we don't use a face coat. The reason it works is our fibers are just a touch lighter than cement and sand, meaning they don't want to be on the base. When we strip this tomorrow, you'll be hard pressed to see any fiber showing. You'll notice I have tape along the edges just in case we get sloppy pouring. I'll fill up that joint. All it takes is a little jiggle to get it level. This will start to kick in, I would say, 15 minutes. Because we're bending the ends, you don't want to work it excessively, or it'll actually keep it from kicking longer and longer and longer. It's 60 degrees in our shop. With the CSA load we have here, I would estimate we'll be bending this in about 15 minutes. If it's 80 degrees, you never want to use more than, say, 20% CSA. You don't need any more. The only reason you would use CSA is if you want to warp something or if you want to pour twice in the same day. Otherwise, Portland mixes will get just as hard overnight as any CSA mix. I think that's good. What I'm going to do is wait till this kicks. As soon as it kicks, I'll take these screws out because that'll be held in place. And then we'll cover this backside by hand with the same mix. And I think we're good. What happens is when it's in your bucket and it begins to generate heat, that heat will not have a place to dissipate. Since this is only 3/4 of an inch thick, the heat can dissipate. In the bucket, I'm already feeling warmth. So I'm just going to spread a little over top of this just to get it separated and out of the bucket. Or else you won't get your bucket clean. I can feel a little bit of heat being generated already.
going from self-consolidating to firm enough to maybe run over the side a little bit. It's getting there that quick. You can tell when it's ready to bend, it loses its plastic sheen. When you shake it like that, not much happens. I'm going to give it a trial bend on that end once I clean my gloves. There's nothing. If it starts to slump, you can save it. If it cracks a little, no problem. Those cracks are fine. It's not running down the hill. Tuck it in. You look good. Good. Let's go for the other end. Pretty close right there. Good. Now, if you fool with this too soon, you'll send this slumping down. What you do is you wet your hands up a little bit. Just give it a little workout. And smooth it right on out. This completes my beam underneath. It's been about 20 minutes since water hit our mix. You could still work it a little bit if you had to. It's starting to generate some heat. The next step is cover it with plastic, put a tarp on it. You could strip this in about probably 2 hours, or you could wait till the next day. Now, we could have stripped this yesterday, but we weren't in a hurry, so we left it overnight. First thing you want to do is take a rubbing stone and hit this edge. This will slice your fingers wide open. I've done it numerous times. So you don't want to touch this without hitting it with a rubbing stone. Grab the forklift, bring it on in. We'll tilt it right over there. Now, can we get it started? I didn't know where the gas hookup was coming from. We ordered a burner online. I don't have it yet, so I didn't put holes in. But since I'm going to wet this down, it's going to stay outside, I better put some drainage holes in. You can buy these attachments for a grinder from Granite Supply Houses. They're core bits with a water feed down the middle. Our stuff is very easy to cut, so you don't actually need the water feed. Wet it up a little, keep the dust down, cut it. Now I'm going to start one from scratch. Ordinarily, if you're drilling holes for a sink, you would have a template. You would drill through a piece of plywood or have a plywood with a hole in it, and then you go, because this thing tends to skip around if you're not careful with it. Before you start coloring, you want to wipe the whole project down with acetone. This will get rid of any leftover wax and allow it to accept the color much better. As long as it wets out right away, you're all right. I can see there's some waxy spots on here. Let the acetone do its work. Now we're ready to start coloring the table. What we're actually doing is we're pigmenting the surface, believe it or not.
This is Trinic's VersaColour in a solution of LS, or lithium silicate. We're going to be pigmenting and densifying the surface at the same time. The key to these is they are pigments, they're not dyes. Any dye you use, a dye is a molecule, and no dye is UV stable as a pigment. These are as UV stable as you can get. They might fade over time, but they won't disappear the way a dye was. I would not suggest using, say, a concrete dye, the kind they use in polished concrete on this, because if you put it outside or near a window, it'll disappear. These come in both 1 ounce, which makes a quart, or 4 ounce, which makes a gallon. You can dilute them in lithium silicate, acetone, denatured alcohol, or water. My favorite is lithium silicate because we're densifying and it's transporting the particle in and locking it in more. Acetone would flash immediately. For this, it wouldn't do us much good. For some things it would work. To apply it, you dilute it like this, put it in a spray bottle, and for a project like this, there's not much you can do wrong. This is coffee, and it'll give us our base. The color you use first will give you the base color, and then you'll build from there. To use it, you sprinkle, spray on, and wipe. This will set up subsequent coats. Make sure it goes down. If you got bug holes, they actually look better. Hit your edges. And let the whole piece have an initial color. Couple of don'ts with VersaColour. Don't leave it puddled like this. It won't work right. Don't apply too many coats in rapid succession. Let this coat almost dry before putting another one on, before starting to blend colors. Your first color will set the other colors up, meaning as this dries, I can feel it get a little bit slimy. That's the lithium silicate working. As it dries, this is already starting to dry. It sucked it in, we're ready for another coat. The more coats you put on, the more depth you're going to have. I like to start with a lighter coat initially, and then we go darker, darker, lighter, lighter, and then we're going to highlight these. Give this probably 5 minutes until it gets dry the way this is, and then we'll be ready for the next coat. The first coat is just about dry, and it's set up a nice honey color for our wood. Now we're going to start adding richness. That was coffee. We're going to go with a sienna brown next. This will use a little different technique. We'll spray it on, and we'll wipe most of it off. As you can see, we've gone from a kind of a mustard yellow to almost a rich barrel looking wood that fast. Don't forget your edges. I like to do underneath as well. It's very similar to staining a piece of wood in that you put the stain on once you get the initial color and you wipe most of it off. It deposits it in the low spots, gives it highlights, takes it off the high. Now, you can see this is drying really quick. I'm going to go with a maybe a black or a chocolate. Let's see what chocolate looks like. Yeah, that'll work.
You can vary the pressure. If I go real light, it's leaving more of it behind. Let it dry, it'll stay deposited that way. You can overwork your color, meaning if I continue to put wet coats on and don't allow a little bit of dry time between coats, it'll take off the previous coat. Once I saturate with this color, I may need to wait 10-15 minutes. They say that the devil is in the details. What I'm going to do now is add details. What I did is I took black. It's a much higher concentration than the stuff we sprayed on. It's probably 4-to-1. And what you do is you put it into the grooves, you wipe off the excess. End up highlighting whatever you want to highlight. Last, you can do your screw holes. You wipe slightly downward, you get the look of a dripping out of a screw hole, nail hole, whatever you want to call it. Thing. You can also use the black to color individual boards. So this board will look a little darker than its neighbor. If you take these saw marks, I intentionally put them in, paint over them like this, wipe up the excess, really bring the piece of wood to life, concrete in this case.
Really?
Yeah, that's on record.
VersaColour on. VersaColour, since it's a pigment, needs to be sealed. If you rub really hard, you can get it to come off of your fingers. And if it rained on it for probably 3 or 4 good rains, it would wash most of it off. But once sealed, it'll lock it in. Since this is an outdoor table, we're going to use Trinic Stamp Shield on it. Stamp Shield is tolerant of some moisture, meaning you don't need to wait a week before you seal. Ideally, you pour this, strip it, process it, give it a day, give it overnight, then seal it the next day. But if you know your concrete and it dries out good enough, you could seal it the same day. I'm using a Shapen Extreme sprayer with a cone-shaped nozzle. The cone-shaped nozzle will spread it out rather than a fan tip, which will pile it up. Always dilute Stamp Shield for high PSI concrete. Stamped concrete you don't need to. You're sealing maybe 3,000 to 4,000 PSI. This right now, it's a day old. It's probably 9,000 or 10,000 already, so it doesn't suck in near as much. You can, this is what I call my winter blend. I diluted it about 40% with the xylene acetone mix. You can use xylene if it's really hot to dilute. The ideal thing is to put 2 light coats on rather than 1 thick one. The wind's kind of swirling. So I'll start at this end. We're going to flip it over to the other side. All I'm doing is wetting out the surface. Come in for a close-up, beginning at the top. Wetting out the surface without any runs. Two light coats is always going to be better than 1 thick one. This flashes off extremely fast, and I'll put another light coat on. The key is get a lot of pressure in your sprayer. You could use an HVLP gun, but if you're good with this type of sprayer, you pump it up hard, use the cone nozzle, you should be able to use this. That fast, it's dry. I'm going to put another light coat on. I like Stamp Shield because if something ever goes wrong, this piece can be fixed, can be recoated. I wanted to show everyone what we did in class. This piece started out with light brown, sienna brown, dark walnut, and black. And to me, it looks fabulous. It looks like a real piece of wood. We made it, and I still am impressed by the way it comes out.